So, Michael, are you from Johnson City originally?
It's kind of a punchline now,
Yeah.
but I kind of joke around with people, but it's true. I moved here in 2000 when I got discharged from federal prison.
Oh, goodness. We do have stuff to talk about
Yeah.
then. So, you moved here after federal prison. So, where did you grow up?
A little town called Sugar Grove. It's hard for me to say sometimes, but in Sugar Grove, Virginia, a little town of about 600 on top of Mount Rogers in
Okay.
Virginia.
So, when were you there? Like, what time frames?
77 to 95.
Okay. So, for a while.
hmm
What was Sugar Grove
For me,
like? Yeah.
oh man, we had kindergarten through 8th grade in one building.
Okay.
My church, Sugar Grove Baptist Church, was right across the baseball field. For me, it was like this little town of a lot of torment, but also equal parts of love.
Okay.
Like I was surrounded by people that only ever loved me, but I probably experienced some of like the deepest like humiliation of my life in that town too.
Really? Well, see, that kind of goes hand in hand, though, a lot of times for a lot of people. Sometimes the closest people, the most loved people, feel that's who we feel like judges us or does the most. So, with that, when did you start feeling that? I mean, like, what age? Was that something that you always kind of had those?
Of those feelings?
Yeah, those like, the ones that fight against each other.
Oh, for sure. So
Were
like
they?
some of my earliest memories were like sexual torment,
Okay.
a lot of sexual humiliation through like some older boys that were in my life.
Okay.
And so from a very early age, like I battled probably sexual identity and maybe sexual addiction by 2nd grade.
Really?
Like just like I came to a place where things were brought into my life, and then from that moment, it's probably the same way you see some tweaker crackhead on the street. That's how I was dealing with lust by 2nd grade.
By 2nd grade, and this would have been the early '80s.
Very much so.
Huh. So, the older boys that you were with, so how did they play? I mean, like you're saying that they were around you by 2nd grade, right?
Correct.
How did they play into all this?
We had an old water tower behind the apartments that I lived in before I moved to Sugar Grove. And it was this place that guys would hike into the woods that could actually climb up into this water tower that still had a single light bulb in it. Strange things.
Yeah.
And guys would get up in there and skate inside of this water tower or just act a fool.
Sure.
But they had like 5-gallon buckets of pornography.
Okay. So this was like a young treehouse. I mean, on steroids.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And for once I got it just exposed like that as a little kid, something about that like it was exotic.
Sure.
It felt great. Like, what in the world is this? How do I get my hands back on it again? And so from an early age, it began to just manipulate my thinking.
So it was like drugs.
Very much so.
Um,
Well, because like in a recovery world, you realize that that chemical that says food, fire, shelter, procreation, do the right thing, tell the truth. The moment that your addiction kicks in, that chemical is completely blocked off. So you might be thinking about doing the right thing all day long until something triggers that emotion. Maybe it's fear, abandonment, humiliation, something. And like for me, like I was 5 foot tall and 80 pounds as a sophomore. So you can imagine me in elementary school. I was
Sure.
just a tiny
Itty
kid.
bitty.
And so like I was an easy target for a lot of people.
Did you have a support system at home?
Oh gosh, no.
Really?
I mean, because by that age I was already wild. And so I think early on I probably kept my parents in a place of fight or flight.
Okay.
Like I was equally as much as sexual trauma was taking place. By 3rd grade I was a pyromaniac. So like I was burning places to the ground.
Really?
Like
By how old?
By mid 3rd grade.
Really?
Like there'd be times that I would set fire to things, and I couldn't tell you why I did it or how I ended up in that place, but I was fascinated by it. But there'd be times that next thing you know, I was into something that I couldn't back out of until the fire department showed up.
Goodness. How did that I mean, do you think, okay, so my experience with these type of interviews is that usually the lack of a support system, leads to some sort of failure, right? Like just unnaturally, you're not thinking about it. At a young age, it either leads to young pregnancies or some sort of failure emotionally or mentally. Or how did the the lack of the support system, you getting around these kids, and that becoming your support system, I assume, the one that kind of like would push you to do stuff. The sexual issues, right? Like the pornography and that kind of stuff. How did that play into the arson and like that? I mean, do they feed off each other, or was it?
I think there's this place where there's deep levels of guilt and shame. And so sometimes where there's a lot of guilt and shame as a young kid of not even knowing how to talk about it at all, it's like, well, let's just do this.
Okay.
It's reactionary. Sometimes it's to get attention. And I don't know if that was me or not. Like, sexuality wasn't talked about in my house.
Okay.
Like, I don't have too many memories of like my parents actually giving me advice, except like, don't be running around with your pants down.
Sure.
I remember that one.
Okay.
Something about that one was off the cuff, but just like practical advice, it just wasn't a thing in my home. Now, I had mom and dad that highly loved me,
Sure.
but as far as like sitting down and talking to me and teaching me, that just wasn't a thing.
Do you think that was a common occurrence in homes in your generational time, like that time frame? Was that kind of how most people were?
I definitely believe that there was probably a big timeline where fathers didn't teach their kids about sexuality. Pornography was, celebrated in the home. If like a kid turns 13, oh, it's just a Playboy. There's no big deal.
Okay.
That was the thing. Like, I could remember all of these family functions where, as a gag gift, a man might get a Penthouse magazine.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, once I knew what that looked like, then it was like kind of like a junkie.
Okay.
I got really good at being able to go through people's homes and snoop and find something that was going to entice me sexually.
Okay. So it sounds like one of your biggest, draws in a young age may have been the sexual issues. I mean, like the magazines and those type of things. Do you think that weighed out? I'm assuming that they was good. I mean, that you did a lot of stuff, skating and all that stuff. Do you seem like that overweighed, possibly, like a lot of the good things that were going on in your life? Or was it?
I feel like there was a constant stream of like all of these end of the world moments in my family. Like for me, caused by me.
Okay.
Breaking things, setting things on fire. For years, pretty much every store that I went into, I'd rob.
Really?
And there'd be these things, I would just do it, and maybe it was never even premeditated. I would just find myself in these situations, and next thing you know, I did it.
Okay.
And then it was like, oh crap.
So you kind of had a draw to do, just do.
Pick something.
Okay, so I'm just going to be transparent here on myself. I never had that, right? So I was kind of always afraid to do anything. Okay, way back when, I've never said this out loud. I'm out loud as far as camera goes. Back when I got into college, the first time I ever tried pot or alcohol or anything like that, the problem was that I was so terrified to do anything. It always outweighed, the risk of just being afraid. So why do you think that didn't really play in? I mean, why was it all? So, like drugs, right? You've been around them and, you do recovery programs. Right. A lot of times it's, it's not necessarily the next high. Sometimes it's the next level. Like, okay, I've done this now. It's not a big deal to go the next step. Like, it seems maybe like that was kind of part of that progression.
Yeah. And what's odd is, I never did drugs or alcohol prior to going into the military.
Okay.
And so as a kid, it was racing trains, jumping train tracks.
Sure.
I would leave a classroom at an early age and to go use the bathroom, but then I'd walk through the school and find doors that were open and I'd find things to get into.
Yeah.
And that was constant. you know. And oftentimes I'd find myself in situations that I never planned on being in. Probably never thought about it, never thought about the consequences. And then it was like, once again, here's somebody in authority like catching me. What are you doing? How did you get in here? What were you thinking? Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, just
Yeah.
kind of like
Blank stare on me.
dumb. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That was my whole childhood.
So at what point do you think that progressed the most, like in your childhood?
It's hard.
And there may not be a time.
I think for most of my life until I wasn't in that place, it was just like that was a steady stream. You know, I had friends' parents who loved me. They did me well. But when I was at their house, things were highly sexual in their house as well. There were things that were just not right in that home as well, you know.
Yeah.
I'd have moments of a church that really loved me, even though I was wild.
Sure.
And so it was like this constant teetering of the whole world is going to find out about me. But then I'd have these reprieves where somebody's like, we really just love you. And so I don't know that there was a point in time where it was bigger in my life than it wasn't. You know, I began to find so much identity in what I could get away with. Oh, look, I'm going to get in and out of this store right now.
It's a little bit of a challenge.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in here and I'm going to rob this store right now and nobody's ever going to know.
And then you're the good boy when it comes to church. And yeah, I can see that.
Or I would find my identity as being the person that could go in that store and steal something. And then turn around and give it to somebody else that was going to make money off of it.
Okay.
Or go into this person's house and steal their daddy's guns.
And then that gave you a little bit of like...
an attaboy.
Yeah. With yourself and then with your friends too. So do you think that like maybe changing, and we'll get off your younger ages here in a minute, but maybe like changing the home structure would have maybe alleviated some of the challenges that you had at a young age?
Oh, very much so.
Okay.
You know, it's kind of ironic now that I found out that my mom's dad was a holiness Pentecostal preacher, but my dad's dad was a moonshine drinking carny of like 11 kids.
Wow.
And so it's kind of ironic, fast forward to me being 47 years old, that filled with the Holy Spirit preaching.
Yeah.
But coming from a past of addiction.
I was getting ready to have that little bit of that moonshine drinking younger age.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of ironic.
Huh.
But my dad lived in a 3-room house. There was no running water. You know, they'd go down to the spring and they'd come back with 5-gallon jugs and fill up everything they had, then fill up jugs again and save it. And so my granddaddy had a little bit of a farm, and then they would also work a neighbor's farm. And so my dad being the youngest, being, 11 other kids in the house, I'm sure that there's just probably things that he was never taught. His parents never had the time to do, so that when he graduated and married my mom early and they instantly had kids, there's just things. It just wasn't in my dad's nature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good point that you made. I don't know if I've ever really thought about that. It's like maybe your grandfather's time, it was just survival. Mm-hmm. Keep my kid alive and survive. Mm-hmm. And then your dad's, there's a little more time, like a little more balance. Mm-hmm. And culture's changed now. Well, heck, you can drive down the road to Powell's and get everything you need to eat for lunch, or McDonald's or wherever. You don't necessarily need to survive. You can live in an apartment and completely live. Then you couldn't. We do have more time, but it seems like we've kind of digressed a little bit on our teachings.
That's right.
Even more so than what it was then. Now we have really no balance. It's just do whatever. Everything's at the end of your fingertips. Mm-hmm. So you had a little bit, this is what I wanted to ask you. Okay, so hearing your story about your mom, your grandparents on both sides, do you think that like a generational curse and a generational blessing a little bit? How do you believe in that? How do you think that falls?
I think yes.
Okay.
I do, but it's a tension for me because I think about there are things that were passed down generationally through the family until the blood of Jesus steps in. I don't think that, once I'm filled with the Holy Spirit and covered in the blood of Jesus, that I have to deal with those curses no more.
Right.
But maybe the curse is the fact that My dad didn't know how to talk. Like, he didn't know how to talk to his kids. All he knew was to go out and work
Right.
60 hours a week. And because he worked 60 hours a week, and sometimes men feel like, well, if I work 50, 60 hours a week, I did my duty. And so there's probably days that he just checked out,
I have that. I mean, I do the same thing.
you know, and then he comes home to a kid that's burnt down a building and broken things in a school, and
Yeah.
people have been called, and somebody came to the school. I done got spanked by the principal. My mom shows up, she spanks me, and then when I go home, I'm already asleep in bed until my dad wakes me up. And it's time for the belt then.
It's interesting because you do say that, like the generational curses that we're kind of always told that we believe in, like it's the big ones, like drugs, or like I've always been told not to drink alcohol because my family has a history of alcoholism, right? Do I believe that's all genetics? No. Do I believe that it's an inherent risk of being addicted mentally to that substance? Yes, I do. Is that a curse that I want to break? Absolutely. Is that the reason we don't drink and don't have? Yes, absolutely. Because it is a precursor already in our family. Like, it's already there. But something you mentioned was the small stuff. So I was always kind of told that sometimes the strength in your life or the soft skills, so handshakes, eye contact, talking, just being able to carry a conversation. You mentioned it with your dad, like maybe some of the generational curses is that inability or inaptitude to have small conversations with your kids. I mean, it is interesting because I've never really thought about like that could be something that we carry with us to the next
And for a long time, I used to hold that against him.
Okay.
And now, being a stepfather of 3, sometimes maybe somebody's just tired and they're emotionally spent and they just don't know how to have that conversation. And so it took me years to come to a place to realize that, my dad did the best he could. I mean, he worked hard all the time, never missed a wrestling match. He'd show up and he'd out-scream the coach to the point the coach was like, Howard, you need to be quiet. Michael can't hear me screaming either. He supported me in that way. He bailed me out financially time and time again, especially in like the depths of my addiction.
Okay.
No matter what it was, I could still like call my dad and be like, I'm struggling. And he'd be there like time and time again, sitting there looking at my dad in the face, and my pupils are about that big. And he'd just be like, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm all right. And he wouldn't ever. And he wouldn't ask me any other questions about it.
That'd be rough. So you said you wrestled?
Uh-huh.
Now that was high school?
Yeah.
I guess?
So I was 82 wrestling 103.
Wow. I mean, you were
so even
bitty.
the 103 still had me by 20 pounds.
So how long did you do that?
4 years.
So all 4 years of high school. So was that something you were kind of looking at taking you to the next level, or was it just...
No, but I definitely didn't like the idea of somebody knocking me out in football.
Okay.
Like I wasn't good at baseball, so I was always put out in, what is that, right field? Playing with the gnats.
One of the fields.
One of them. I'd just sit out there and I'd just play with gnats. And then I didn't like football because I was so stinking tiny. And actually, a lot of those players were the ones that would torment me through my school years.
And of course, now that you being little and playing football, they're going to pick on you.
It was like the football, basketball players that would hold me down in the shower and piss on me, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I was tiny and an easy
that
target.
Was awful.
Oh yeah. But wrestling it was a team sport, but it was kind of individual.
Sure.
And I had a coach that was just flat out amazing. He kind of runs FCA, I think in Abingdon now. He left Marion after years of wrestling and football, and then went to John Battle in Abingdon. His name was Steve Wright. And that dude he kicked my butt every week, but man, did he pour love into me.
See, that's another... There's two things. Kids are just vicious. Mm-hmm. They are. I mean, they're just... Anybody that believes that kids are not just mean, I mean, they can be. They can just, some of the stories that I've heard just here recently of kids in high school about this flood and all this stuff going on, it makes you cry.
Yeah.
Second is that no matter how many people I have here, sitting here, one thing that they always talk about is somebody in that pivotal age, 13, 14, that really got behind them and pushed them. Like they kind of always have something mentally that stuck with them. One of them was he had a baby when he was a freshman in high school, dropped out of high school. The picture on the wall in his coach's room was a football player holding a 7-pound baby
Shoo.
and saying a 7-pound baby changes, or 7 pounds changes your life forever, right? And then that coach told him never to give up. Like, he's the one that became a cop at 54. Never to give up. And he says that stuck with him no matter what happened. Drops out of high school, gets married, divorced before he's 18, never gave up. So a lot of times, a young age, there's suicide. I'm sure in your endeavors now, you're seeing younger
Very much so.
mental, like anguish, just out of this world. I've never experienced them such young. It's surprising because when I was going through school, I probably was I can remember 5th, 6th grade when I heard like cussing and stuff. I was like, oh, this is awful. And it was just, I guess, the culture that I was around was a little more like serene. It was very churchy anyways, but.
Well, some people's testimony is that they have only ever known the goodness of their family and the Father.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and, we'll get into some of the shining light moments, but so you done all that, you wrestled, and then high school ended. You had all this trauma. At that point in your life, did you know that was trauma?
It
Or was
was
it
just
life?
normal.
Yeah.
Here it is. I'm dealing with sexual addiction, like, and not intercourse, just the addiction to like
Sure.
the sensation. You could probably say I was a kleptomaniac. You could probably say I definitely had an issue with starting fires.
Okay.
Lying. I mean, from my early stages, lying just became the thing. You got to get out of trouble. You prepare a lie, it works.
Yeah.
Use it again. Or maybe you're about to get in trouble. You have fear just raging inside of you. You prepare a lie, but then you never get caught. And so then there's almost like this weird tension, I think chemically,
Sure.
of the fact that you didn't get caught. So then there's almost even more fear building up because you didn't get caught.
I do think there's a point where it does become just kind of a second nature. Like it's just natural.
Yep.
I mean, like if we think about like the animal kingdom, right? Like it is just second nature to get out of whatever. We're not that far detached from animals. I mean, it's not from an evolutionary standpoint. I'm just talking about sometimes we just act like monkeys. I mean, we're just dumb. And we are to the point like where it's so easy to get trapped kind of in those like woven
It's like
self-generated stories and
muscle memory.
it is. It's just second nature. I mean, you just think about it. So you're kind of in this addicted. I would say, like, I mean, just me sitting here talking to you, like you're almost like it was always like a challenge. Like what was next? Like wrestling, right? Like it was kind of by yourself. It was a challenge to beat the other guy because of how small you were or whatever it might have been.
Yeah,
I
like,
mean, the fires and
most often I ever only really just like won my wrestling matches because I was good at getting beat up.
yeah. Well, I mean, you were already there.
Yeah.
You knew where your limits and stuff were, and so what was next? I mean, what happened?
So post high school, I went to community college for a year.
Okay.
Proverbially, I had still burnt every bridge. My parents couldn't trust me. Couldn't keep it. I didn't keep a job.
And that was mainly the lying or everything kind of combination?
Yeah, just everything.
Okay.
And so I went to school to Virginia Highlands Community College for a year, but I really didn't do anything.
Sure.
I'd go to a computer lab and play Bond or whatever that was and play Mortal Kombat in the cafeteria for about a year. And then when I turned 18, then it was like my get out of Dodge kind of thing. I had friends that were close to me that were going into the Army. And then just really quickly, I went into a recruiter and said, hey, I like to cook. Let me be a cook. Let's sign up. Let's go.
Just to do it.
I mean, I never
The
knew
next challenge?
I never knew that I could research and find a job that I really wanted or a job that would be a career. It was just like, oh, I think I like to cook. Let's just do it. Well, I mean, I didn't have any money. I didn't have a car. I wasn't doing anything.
Well, was up to that point, was your parents still
Yeah.
supporting you.
Yeah, I would still like use one of their vehicles from time to time, or like I would hitchhike to Abingdon and go to school. You know, catch a ride with somebody, but then not do anything but sit there and wait at campus 8 to 10 hours until I could catch a ride back home with somebody.
Yeah. So you walked into a recruiter's office,
Mm-hmm.
told them you wanted to be a cook. They signed you up.
They said, awesome.
Was it at that time, was there's like these big sign-on bonuses and all this stuff?
I didn't know there were sign-on bonuses until I got to basic training.
Okay.
And all these people that were in basic training were like, I got 20 grand. I'm like,
They saw you coming. It's exactly. They said, "This dude wants to be a cook. Let's sign him up."
Yeah.
Because I assume that's probably not like the most. Not everybody walks into a recruiter's office and said, "I just want to cook."
yeah. You know, in hindsight, I feel like it was probably divine providence that I didn't have a $20,000 sign-in bonus, because I might have been dead quicker.
Yeah. Well, it's you're probably not wrong.
I've thought about that a few times.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Hi there. Justice from the future here. First of all, if you're still watching, I just want to say thank you. Second, something happened with the recording of this video. For some reason, our camera's cut out. So for the rest of this video, you're only going to see the wide shot. But it is still such a good conversation, we felt like including it anyway. Third, we have about an hour left of this whole interview that went on for a good couple of hours. If you want to see that hour, it's just that wide shot. But if you want to see it, comment below and let us know, and we'll make sure to include that in a future podcast release. Back to the video.
I mean, things do work exactly how God wants them to work. There's no doubt in my mind. So what was it like as you were going through basic?
training? Oh, gosh.
What time? Okay, hold on. What time frame was this?
So this was 96.
Okay.
I loved basic, but that began like this journey of me like really like developing personas with every people group that I was with.
Okay.
And so I didn't like who Michael Turley was in Smith County, Virginia. I didn't like that kid. So now that I'm here, let me fabricate who I'm going to be.
So it almost gave you like that proverbial new start, like just continuously.
Yeah.
You were able just to start over.
But it was saturated in lies from the beginning.
Okay.
So there was always this tension of I'm creating portions of my backstory that I want people to take a bite of in hopes that they're going to like me. But then I'm actually creating friendships. And so it's like, how do I have this friendship with somebody that I really care about and let my guard down to say this is false? And so like there was, some people in my life for 4 years straight, I still kept portions of that lie.
Huh.
Through our whole friendship.
Was it just easier, or was it?
Just fear.
Okay.
Just fear.
Well, it's kind of funny because you went from like no fear to like those things. Was that what was scary? Like around this time frame for you in your life was
Yeah.
like those old stories from the past coming back out.
Shame.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all do, unfortunately.
But I mean, my basic was amazing. I made good friends. I mean, one of my best friends still to this day. I mean, he was just led to the Lord last year, and he's like, you know what, God, if you can change Michael Turley's life, you got to be real.
So you're the scale. Yeah, that's never really what we want to hear,
No.
but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, hindsight's good. But,
Yeah.
So what happened? So you got out of basic. Where'd you go to basic?
Fort Jackson, South
Okay.
Carolina.
And then you went.
Went to AIT up in
Okay.
Fort Lee, Virginia.
What was AIT like for an Army cook?
Oh, it was easy. I mean, it was just, 8 weeks of basic cooking.
Okay.
I had a couple of drill sergeants in AIT that just really they did care, but they didn't care. So the first weekend that we were there, they gave us off-post weekend passes.
Very first weekend.
Very first weekend.
Yeah, it goes
So
against
really-
most every story you've ever heard.
So like we were the one platoon that was just rubbing it in everybody's face that every weekend was doing whatever we wanted.
Okay. And then so you get out of AIT.
Yeah, and then I went from there to Vilseck, Germany.
So first post out of AIT basically was Germany. Huh.
And then Germany to Bosnia. So we went in with the S4. So right after the initial conflict in Bosnia, we were the next crew in.
Okay.
And there were a bunch of civilian contractors there. So initially when I got to Bosnia, I didn't cook because they had contractors that would do it. So my first job in Bosnia was being a puppeteer.
Really?
I got attached to a Mormon chaplain that was going to orphanages and refugee camps, putting on puppet shows, teaching about landmines.
That's wild.
It was weird.
So what was one of the what was one of the shows like?
Uh,
Do you remember?
some musicians playing guitar and singing, and we had like these crank yanker, like professional style puppets, and I just be behind a canopy and just be sitting there wiggling my thumb for a few hours.
So what was the purpose of the stories, though? I mean, was it like to tell the kids, like, hey, watch out for
Yeah,
this type of
you know,
stuff?
landmines killed more people in Bosnia than bullets.
Okay.
And so I couldn't even tell you what like the overall humanitarian purpose of it was.
Of the whole conflict.
Of being attached to that
Oh,
to
okay.
that chaplain. But that was my first job. And then when I come back, I got attached to a 10th Mountain Division 3rd Ranger Battalion on a place called Hilltop 1326, where me and this little guy named Conrad Williamson from Jamaica, Queens, we went up and ran like a small dining facility, just the two of us, with about 50 dudes.
So you got pretty close to those guys then.
Uh, it was like 3 tents of guys and then 1 tent that just went deep down into the mountain full of armament.
Wow.
And I'd cook on a mountaintop full of explosives.
So literally almost like a movie.
Literally.
I mean, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
Hilltop 1326 was probably 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so quite a while. I
Yeah.
mean, as far as, I guess, these outposts was concerned. What was life like? I mean, was it challenging? And
In Bosnia,
yeah, just
Not
overall, really.
it was just a lot of partying, sleeping in tent cities, going out on a lot of patrols. There was a point in time where they had found a railroad tunnel where they had like loaded a bunch of like Serbians or Croatians into and blew up both sides of it. And so there was so much conflict taking place that they shut down all convoys. So then all of our convoys would be through Chinook. So I spent a time of just being a TC. I would just fly with the Chinook pilot, you know, back and forth for a while. I feel like my role in Bosnia was, I had positions that were envious to other people. Like nothing made sense. Like, oh, you're trained to do this, but you're not going to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. So, like, you went in as a cook, and then you were almost front line. I mean, from puppeteering. I mean, I would call that front line. I mean, because you were out there actually doing with the people.
Right.
Versus, you know, back somewhere kind of hidden.
I wasn't just sitting on the base all day.
Right. And so it doesn't fit the mold in the slightest. Again, we would say now, understanding that was God putting you in positions to really be able to tell the story or change somebody's life. But at the time, what did you think? I mean, why did you care?
I did. You know, it was a place, I was at the Guardian base, so like all of the main logistics in Bosnia came in and out of this place. It was the largest field hospital, so you had all your other NATO countries were there.
Okay.
And we were right next to a Muslim refugee camp. So like 4 o'clock every morning, called a prayer. So like there was something to me that was like, I know this is a Muslim refugee camp, but I don't feel threatened at all. But something about this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
You know, coming from a town of 600 to 1,000 people to Bosnia. And I'm just seeing buildings blown up everywhere. And a lot of Bosnia, to me, it looked like Grundy, Virginia. That's just what the country looked like. And so being
It was
around
very mountainous.
mountains, real deep valleys. And so I would deal with people, like if I was working the front gate, you know, you'd have people coming up begging for food, money, whatever, every day. So there was like this deep tension, like what else can I do? So like I feel like I just wanted to love on people there on this side of the street, but then the moment that I was off duty, I was just stupid. Like,
Okay.
what can I get into next?
So it sounds like maybe right here was kind of like a changing point. I mean, like you were fighting, I guess, your internal
Identity.
battles here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were like you knew kind of where you were supposed to be, but you wanted to revert. But it's kind of always funny to me is, you know, philosophy was always my biggest thing at ETSU. I hated school. If it wasn't for the gym at ETSU, I don't think I would have stuck around any at all. But philosophy and like humanitarian studies and the humanities and and history of the world, like understanding different people. That's one reason this stuff intrigues me, is because you get to see all these levels of like the mental state and where it takes people. Because me and you could have the same thought right now. You're going to react different based off that thought than I am.
Right.
Most of the time. It's just our psyche and where we grew up and our cultures. And in this time, it seems like you were going through a very challenging time, maybe even if you didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
But this was where you started really challenging yourself. And how old were you when you were deployed in
I'd been
Bosnia?
19.
So you was 19. Still very young.
Very much so.
So what challenged you the most? I mean, let's say deployment. I don't know the background of the Bosnia conflict. What was the issues? I mean, what was really going on?
As far as like in country or
Yeah,
with
just
myself?
in country yourself, in the military. I mean, there's got to be something there that really just kind of stood out to you at 19 years old.
Yeah. To me, there was always the question like, why are we really here? Like, questions like that never really got answered. Oh, it's for democracy. Very well may
Sure.
have been. But I seen people that were really good at doing their jobs, people that were really good at loving, but equally, I seen just waste of money. That was probably one of my early thoughts over there, like attention.
So it stood out to you.
Mm-hmm. There'd be days we'd go to a range and just blow ammunition for 8 hours because they didn't want to put it on a train and ship it back to Germany. Things like that were always just a little bit weird for me.
Okay.
I really don't know how to answer that question.
No, that's fine.
A lot of my time over there was just kind of being blown away at the fact that I actually had the opportunity to do it.
Sure.
Waking up early in the morning and riding through a street or through a city that's flat out abandoned because it's a time of prayer for Muslims, so nobody else is out. And I've got a lieutenant colonel that's missing his wife, so he's listening to like 80s love songs like Lady in Red, just gagging down the street.
So again, it goes back to like something out of a movie, like you would see on Netflix. How long were you there total?
19 months.
Wow.
So I was Bosnia, came back to Germany,
Okay.
and then had a brief stint in Hungary, in processing in and out, and then I got deployed to Slovenia, which now I realize it's on like just the backside across the water from Italy. Never knew that.
You were right there
at that time, but I was over there when they were doing revisions to the Dayton Peace Accord.
Okay.
So other than about 30 or 40 support troops, the lowest ranking person was probably a 4-star general.
Wow. So again, went in as a cook.
Yeah. So here we are stationed outside of one of Hitler's old castles. Just massive castle. We're in about, 20 below zero. And we're in a little town where we're able to go in and like completely buy every bit of food in town and cook it for people there. Like we were given massive amounts of money, not only to have military rations, but to purchase them locally. But just to be there when they were doing revisions to one of the biggest peace agreements.
Yep, yeah.
Sure. I
Sure.
got to cook for the Duchess. I did Thanksgiving for the Duchess of Belgium. Like that was kind of cool.
It is
It's
cool.
just like
Yeah.
little boy from Sugar Grove, Virginia.
And went in as a cook.
Yeah.
And never thought it would take you that far. I mean,
Yeah.
what was your expectations when you went in to what they really were? I mean, did they even
I
match
don't
up
think
in the
I had
slightest?
any. I think it was just when I first signed up, it was like, okay, now I'm 18. I don't have a car. I don't have any money. I need to go somewhere where I don't have to be this kid.
Sure. So the biggest thing was the challenge to do something new or get away from your old self.
That's right.
So how long were you in military total?
4 years.
So you stayed your 4 years.
Yeah. In Germany, actually, I first started drinking in Hungary on my way back from Bosnia, and it was like wine coolers.
Okay.
Bartles and James.
Sure. Yeah. Mine was, what I guess I got into was the Smirnoffs.
Yeah.
The fruities. Didn't think anything of it, social.
But really quickly, when I got back to Germany, it turned from that to vodka real fast.
Okay.
And then it just turned into hardcore partying. A lot of my friends were big into, it was like Korn, Deftones, Marilyn
Okay.
Manson, Limp Bizkit kind of time frame. and it just, I'd say,
Woodstock.
yeah. And so coming back to Germany at that point in time, I would say was when things started getting darker quicker. You know,
Okay.
I began to just not have any reserve on like staying faded all the time.
Okay. So you just kind of stayed in the state of mind
Mm-hmm.
where it was just, now was it just alcohol at this
To
point?
begin,
Okay.
yeah. And then by the time I was leaving Germany, coming to the States, it started getting into psychedelics.
Okay.
And then when I got sent stateside, Fort Polk, Louisiana, I was 3 hours north of New Orleans, but 3 hours east of Houston.
Okay.
But before I left Germany, I had started getting into, like, at that point in time, it was the underground rave scene. People call it EDM now.
Sure.
25 years ago,
It was just
it was raves.
raves.
You know, people weren't.
So ecstasy and stuff
Yeah.
of that
so,
nature.
Yeah, loads of it.
Yeah.
And so there was a huge community for that in Louisiana and Texas.
And you were still in the military at
Very
the
much
time.
so.
Okay.
And so, like the same way people might go out on like a fish tour, I would go out on what was called a caffeine tour or moonshine tour. So there were these big record labels of DJs that toured all over the South. And so that just, once I got wrapped up in that world, that was, so 98 to 30, 36, so 98 to 2016
Wow. So you
Would-
stayed tied up into
would have been me in that culture.
Okay, so it started out alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Was it even like, I mean, was it just an easy step, or was it again that next challenge?
Yeah, because I just found so much identity in being the guy that was always happy
Yeah,
or the guy that was ready to party.
sure. Okay, I can see that. And so you had your support system, your friends,
Mhm.
the ones, and you all just kind of got stuck
Oh yeah,
in this lifestyle. Now, was that lifestyle, because you were in it for a long time?
a long time.
Was that, I mean, was it an easy lifestyle, I guess? I mean, when I say easy, that's probably the wrong word. Was it something that was like, you could stay there? I mean, like even today, if you didn't find God,
Mhm.
you could still kind of be in that lifestyle, or do you think you'd been dead by now, or is it sustainable, I guess?
It was.
Okay.
Uh,
Because I mean, you were in it for a long time.
I don't know how, but it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there was all these points in times where I was probably almost dead. You know, I found pictures one time where half my body was purple and the other half was yellow,
Really?
of just probably my liver shutting down, like
Yeah.
jaundicing. You know, I used to, when I first started walking in freedom, I used to tell people, oh, I never overdosed. And one day, Holy Spirit quickened me and he goes, I want you to think about those words. All you did was overdose. That was me. I was just excess everything. And once you go to this pocket of people, when you find out what they got, and then you get connected with them, so you're going to get your dope from them, and then they expect you to be that kind of person. But then when I got into like distributing, then I'd be somebody different with, like, once again, it was like each people group I'd be somewhat different. So I might be going to Houston to get all of my dope from the Rastas down there, but I'd come back to Louisiana and sell them to the Aryan Nation. So I'd be this guy in Houston, but throwing my Levi's and my white T-shirt, and then I'd make my way down to South Louisiana, selling my dope to skinheads who were like celebrating for their brothers just getting out of prison.
Yeah. Now, was it, so there's a lot to unpack there. Was it, you were very, you watch, again, let's talk about movies.
Yeah.
You watch American Made,
Uh-huh.
Tom Cruise, like, it was kind of like what he did,
Mhm.
right? Like he just fell into these groups and
Yeah.
would become this group, and then he'd come back and sell it to this group, but he was working while the government, you know, like,
Very much so.
how difficult, like, okay, so you were in the lifestyle, how long did it take to get to that point, like where now you're dealing?
Oh man,
I mean, was it fairly fast?
8
or-
months.
Oh, so it didn't take long.
No, I mean, cause even in the depths of addiction at that point in time in my life, I still had some of the greatest friends. You know, you got all these young people, they're trying to establish community, they're trying to establish identity.
Yeah.
And so whatever it is, it's like ride or die, we're in this.
Okay, you mentioned that. How old were you think, around that time?
20?
Okay.
21.
So this was
Yeah.
all very fast
Very, very much so.
after you graduated high school then.
You know, and then I would just find myself, it was always like chasing the next party. I'd go to
Yeah.
this city, meet people, and all of a sudden you'd have a safety net of people. It was like my hub. And so it was go here, lose 3 days to psychedelics and, you know, underground raves, drive back hungover to the Army base, get 4 hours of sleep, wake up and go back to duty the next week. You know, and oftentimes the hardcore partying would just be on the weekends, but then it got to where there might be 2 or 3 days a week I'm dropping LSD and going to work.
So it become manageable
Oh yeah.
to some extent. How long did it take from the time, I mean, again, I'm asking, I'm not exacts, but
Right.
from the time you started doing that stuff to the time you were able to function
Like to function without it or to function while doing it?
while doing it?
I'd say I was probably functioning while I was doing it since day one.
Really? So you were pretty high level.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. So it wasn't like I guess like a training period for your body. You just kind of jumped into it.
I did. It was excess from day one.
I mean, you probably are very lucky to be alive.
Hmm. My doctor one time, she goes, you know, I'm surprised you don't have palsy. She goes, you should be missing all your teeth and your face should be crooked.
Yeah. And there's a reason God
Yeah.
sustained.
Yeah.
Do you feel at that time like you had any idea of really where you were at in your life?
No. You know, there was always a constant fear that somebody's going to find out. There was always a fear that, oh crap, I'm about to go to prison, which I eventually did.
Yeah.
But equally at the same time, I could see all these little pockets where the Lord was pursuing me
Okay.
the whole time.
Now or
Then
like you still noticed
even
it?
then, like, you know, at one point in time in Germany, I had a sergeant that was coming by and taking me to church, and being a little Southern Baptist boy, I don't know that I ever knew anything about the Holy Spirit. And then he takes me to a church in Germany, and I can remember sitting in this church out in the middle of Vilseck, Germany, thinking, why are we all saying the same thing? I didn't know it even at that. I mean, because I was saved and baptized as a kid, but I was, you know, prodigal
Sure.
the whole time. I was never discipled.
Yeah, that was me.
But next thing you know, I had found myself in this church in Germany thinking, we're all saying the same thing. Why? Now I know at that moment, not even knowing what the baptism of the Holy Spirit was, that I was in this church speaking in tongues.
Huh.
Had no grid for it. And then I can remember getting up out of the floor. So I had went under with the power of the Spirit. And then I got up and was still praying in tongues, thinking, God, why are we all saying the same thing?
Kind of this outer body experience.
Very much so. And it freaked me out.
Okay.
Or just, I didn't know how to take it. And so I left that church and I walked all the way back to the Army base. And for years I mocked that experience because I didn't know how to gauge it. I didn't know what it was, but really realizing in that moment that the power of the Lord was falling on me. But I had a sergeant that would come to my barracks room day after day. Hey, where you at? Let me love on you. Where you at?
Was he doing that for everybody? Or was that more of like a...
I don't know. I met him in the grocery store one day.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And he wanted to take me to a church that wasn't on the Army base.
I feel like God was chasing you out.
Man.
Okay, so and you kept going back
I
to
did.
the old life.
I went right back to my old lifestyle.
I mean, pretty much immediately.
And he would show up at my barracks sometime and be like, you know, verbatim, he said, "You're reveling with the enemy." And it was just
So he saw right through it.
right through it. And my whole time in Louisiana, like I had a couple of sergeants that would take me to these little black Pentecostal churches and just love on me.
Yeah. So you never had that lack of love.
I
mean,
didn't.
That was never your issue. That's pretty wild. Because most of the time that's kind of the opposite. It's like you never really... And maybe sometimes we just don't want to see that we have somebody in our corner. It's easier to say we don't and just kind of fall back. So how long were you... I mean, like, so you got out of the military.
Yep.
Right.
Well, so for me, like then, that would have been coming up on the beginning of 2000. And so through my addictions, like I caught charges in the military.
Okay.
The irony is such a strange story. But one time I woke up hungover and I was freaked out because I had missed formation. So I just didn't go to work that day. Just didn't go to work. And then the next day I realized, crap, I didn't go to work. And so I had this fear of actually going to my commanding officer and being like, this is what happened. I slept in. I missed work. So I went AWOL in the Army, but never left the Army base.
I don't know. I mean, how often does that happen?
I don't know.
So, is that the charge that you caught?
No, so when I was in Louisiana, like I had gotten to a place where I'd sell drugs to anybody in the Army. I was like the guy that could get things.
Okay.
And really early on, that's something that made me feel special.
That connecting piece.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, and so I sold to everybody. And then one day they come into the dining facility, the criminal investigation department, and took me in. And there was this, like, it was deep-seated fear, but also this sigh of relief. Like, okay, I don't have to hide behind this no more.
Yeah.
And I went to trial, and then I could realize that people that I had sold dope to for 2 years, they were all testifying against me. And I could go back and remember every place that I seen them. And so I went,
Wow.
you know?
Yeah, that had to be a little bit of a heart-wrenching. I mean, maybe not like in the normal way, but like you're sitting there, you're like, I mean, this is real.
Yeah.
You know, all these people are going kind of against me a little bit, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think for most of my life, the Lord had given me an uncanny ability to like emotionally rebound just like that.
Okay.
Like my whole world might be crashing down today, but I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to wake up and things are going to be okay tomorrow. And I think that's kind of rare.
Yeah, I do. I think that a lot of times, so again, it was like a story that we've had, like sometimes like, what was it? So she had somebody tell her that's okay to dip your toes into the darkness, but never to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like some people can do that,
Mm-hmm.
can just kind of like touch it and then like, okay, I'm done. You know, it's enough. I feel bad for myself. I'm gonna go on. A lot of times people just get kind of stuck. You know, I don't think everybody can do that.
Yeah.
You know, am I saying I don't think everybody can do that? I know anybody can do it
Mm-hmm.
by the power. But sometimes we just
Mm-hmm.
self-wallow in our own pity.
Yeah.
I mean, we just get stuck. So how were you able to go through all this? Life-changing experiences in Bosnia, come back, catch charges, assuming it's federal?
Yeah. I went to prison in Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
What'd they get? I mean, what was the charges?
Well, here's the irony is that they said, we got you for this and this and this and this. And then I lied. I was like, no, officer, it was just acid. Which, in retrospect, would be a bigger charge.
So you told them that you did the biggest one. Well, yeah. Should have started with the lighter stuff.
It's a punchline now.
Yeah.
Originally, I was going to do like 7 years. But my military attorney never advised me of all of my rights. So there was a point in time when I was at Fort Sill that they called a bunch of us into the chapel and said, y'all are all going home.
How long were you in?
So that was right at 8 months.
I feel like, didn't you say there was another 8 in your story?
Mm-hmm. Like 8 years in prison?
Well, yeah, like there was I think that numbers matter.
Right.
Right. So I was just trying to put pieces together.
So I was in prison in Oklahoma. And then when I got out of prison, I still was incarcerated. I still served jail time locally multiple times.
For saying the same stuff, or was it?
Mm-mm. My next charge was embezzlement.
How they get it? We probably gonna have to do like 4 parts to this,
Yeah.
but how did they get you with that?
So my embezzlement was civilian when I was living here in
Okay.
Johnson City.
Okay.
But military-wise, like, you know, they got me on distribution of narcotics.
Okay.
But then I was never advised of all of my rights. So I got
So that's how you got off
Mhm.
of that one. And then sounds like there was multiple people that got charged, and then they all got off because of the same issue? Or?
They all had the same attorney.
Okay.
So they were all from Fort Polk, Louisiana, and they all had the same attorney.
You've got this, I mean, it's unbelievable how deep your stuff goes, your story, your testimony.